I'm honored to continue off our CO2 safety segment with a huge leader in the space, the Compressed Gas Association. The Compressed Gas Association, otherwise known as CGA, was founded in 1913 for the industrial and medical gas supply industries. For more than 110 years, they have been focusing on published standards and practices that codify industry practice and promote safety across for the industry worldwide. CO2 Meter has been a longtime partner of the association, and we lean very heavily on CGA when it comes to aiding and promoting compliance with regulations and standards around hazardous gases. Here with me today is Laura Brumsey with CGA, who has also been an incredible resource for CO2 Meter and myself with her industry expertise in the field. I'm excited to be here today as it is also National Safety Month, so what better way to conclude the month than to close with driving more awareness on gas safety in our community. Everyone, it's VP of Marketing Morgan Morris here with CO2 Meter, and I am honored to continue our CO2 safety segment with a huge leader in the space, the Compressed Gas Association. The Compressed Gas Association, for those that don't know, otherwise known as the CGA, was founded in 1913 for the industrial and medical gas supply industries. For more than 110 years, they've been focusing on publishing standards and promoting safety across the industry on a global scale. CO2 Meter has been a longtime partner of the association, and we lean very heavily on them when it comes to promoting compliance with regulations and standards around hazardous gases. And here with me today is Miss Laura Brumsey with the CGA. I'm so excited to be here with her to talk a little bit on CO2 safety. And also this month is also National Safety Month. So what better way to continue to drive awareness than to talk about the gas as we close out the month. So thank you, Laura, for being here with me today, first of all.
Thank you, Morgan. It's great to be on. I'm excited to chat with you today about CGA and the work that we do, and really appreciate all the support that we get from CO2 Meter and the good ideas that you bring to our committee processes.
Thank you so much, Laura. Likewise, I'm excited to get some industry feedback from yourself. And just to kick things off, would you be able to tell us just a little bit more on the CGA and your role there specifically?
Absolutely. So thank you for the fabulous introduction to CGA. What most people, I think, don't realize about us is that we're not a traditional trade organization. You don't see us doing a lot of trade shows and things like that. You know, we're very, very focused on the development of safety standards, and that's our primary activity. It's the core of our mission as an organization. And so that's what most of our time and resources go towards. The members in our organization are pretty much anybody who is involved in producing, handling, transporting, storing compressed gases, and the equipment that we need to use those gases safely. So anything from cylinders and valves to pipelines and hoses and things of that nature, all the way down to atmospheric monitoring and things like that. So we really do have a broad scope of membership, and the people from those member companies are who populate our technical committees, and those technical committees are who write and update our safety standards. And so that's kind of a really high level overview, but that's how CGA works, where standards that are written by our industry with the input of our industry to ensure that everybody is operating in accordance with best practices and highest levels of safety in mind.
That was a great insight, Laura. Thank you for giving us a little bit of perspective. I think that's very true. You know, a lot of times with associations, they don't understand the scope of it, and CGA is doing so much within the safety realm, which is incredible. I'd like to know just a little bit, however, from your perspective, and I always like to ask with industry experts like yourself, how did you get started? Have you always been in the gas industry, and how did you get to your current role with CGA?
Absolutely. So I don't think anybody wakes up on, kindergarten graduation day. No kid is up there saying, I want to be a standards developer for the rest of their life. I think we all kind of find our way into this profession almost by chance. I have been with CGA since I graduated from college. I did my master's work in hazard communication. And really in consumer sciences. And so a lot of my focus when I graduated was going to work for a government agency to deal with product safety issues. And as I graduated was when there was a pretty significant economic downturn, and I found myself looking for other opportunities for employment because the government put on a hiring freeze. I wound up at CGA kind of by chance. It's almost one of those stories that I'll tell over a drink at a bar every now and then. But basically, I answered a Craigslist ad for employment and ended up working here. So I started as a committee administrator, just working with our committees to organize meetings and keep their work moving on schedule, and have gradually had the opportunity to work my way up. I'm currently the vice president of operations and administration, and I get to do a little bit of everything in my job, and it's what I love about it. I work a lot with members, which I really enjoy. I do a lot of our international harmonization practice, which is where we work to make sure that standards are consistent wherever in the world that they're used. I get to dabble on the legal side a little bit. It's really, I mean, I do IT, I have lots of different pieces. And I think to say, like, how did I get here? I had a lot of people that were willing to give me opportunities to kind of stretch myself and basically to take on what I was willing to take on in terms of challenges. And so with that support, I was able to kind of gradually build the skill set that I needed to be here.
That's incredible, Laura. Thank you. So you've worn many hats, it sounds like, but definitely yes. Doing what you love. And I see you all over across the internet as well with your resources, which I think is so great. So thanks for giving us a little perspective. I always like to know how industry professionals get to where they are. So I think that's fascinating. But touching base on the safety and resources. So you mentioned that just a little bit there. Let's talk about what we're here to talk about today, which is CO2 safety. So I know that the CGA has just a plethora of resources out there, so many different things, whether it's safety posters and standard resources and guides. But I'm curious to know, when it comes to the topic of CO2 safety, is there any resource out there or even training that you might find most valuable for CGA members specifically?
I think we have a broad set of resources that can be applicable at different levels of our membership. So for folks who are more on the technical side, we have a pretty extensive library of CO2 publications. Those are maintained by our carbon dioxide committee, and Christina Hartz is the admin on that group, and she does a fantastic job, and I'm sure she would be happy to connect anybody with resources that they're looking for that are more kind of on the technical and engineering operations side. The piece that's the newest for us are the more public-facing pieces, and we've actually done quite a few of those on CO2 because there were so many emerging applications where we were seeing the potential for safety issues and a lot of opportunity for education. And so we have several safety posters in this topic area, some that are geared more towards specific applications. So like if you're a CO2 supplier that is working with the cannabis industry, we have several posters that are like specifically targeted at that industry. We have several that are specifically targeted at the food and beverage industry. And so they are really easy resources to just be able to hand off to your customers. And Morgan, I'm sure in your line of work, you've got to work with enough of kind of those customer applications to know there's a lot of misunderstanding about CO2 in those spaces. Yeah. And so there's a really valuable resource there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit it on the head there. I know we always say with our customers, even though you can't smell, see, or taste the gas, it is there. And, you know, it's something that they're dealing with every day, but a lot of times they don't see the hazards at play. So I think, like you said, awareness and education is key. And what you guys are doing with all the resources that you have is incredible. I'll tell you, Laura, too, I've been doing these segments with a lot of our industry partners. And one thing that's really ring true throughout all of them is they all have mentioned CGA as a huge resource, which to me, I was so excited to get on this call too to tell you that, because it just shows what you guys are doing is so paramount, not only for the members, but for industry professionals, manufacturers, suppliers, which I think is just so critical.
That's really great to hear. You know, it is nice to know. I think for a long time, people had a misconception that CGA was some kind of enforcement body or inspection agency. And I think a lot of people over the years, you know, our members always knew who we were and that was not what we do. But especially in kind of more of these spaces, I find even today, every now and then we get to go on a field trip to an end-use site or something, and we have to explain when we walk in the door, like, we're not here to inspect you. We're not here to tell you what you're doing is wrong or anything like that. We're just here to share resources with you. And it really is I think interesting is more people kind of get to know us and get to understand that we're here to provide resources to help. We're not here as OSHA or a regulatory agency or anything like that. I think the other resource that I would point people towards in our CO2 library is our e-learning modules. We do have a couple of e-learning modules that cover basic information on CO2, and I think especially we've got one on filling CO2 cylinders. As well as a couple of on-demand webinars that were recorded. And so those are available. They're more for somebody who's in industry but might be newer to the CO2 area, and gives them kind of a top-level basic guidance in those areas.
No, that's excellent. Thank you for sharing just a little bit. I know you guys have resources again on all different gases, but your CO2 resources, even for myself, are so helpful and beneficial when we're looking up different things, if it's regulatory standards or just like you mentioned, specific CO2 safety protocols in the industry. But I would like to switch gears just a little bit. Is compliance with these as well? So when it comes to CGA compliance and regulatory standards, they're not stagnant, they're changing constantly. And I know I'd love to know if you could give just a little bit of insight for industry professionals, if there should be anything that might be new or updated within the next 1 to 2 years you could share.
Yeah, absolutely. So the standards that we develop oftentimes do get picked up either in national codes or in federal regulations. And so there is an opportunity, while our standards, we consider them voluntary, they're best practices for the industry. We want people to follow them. What we see sometimes is that those standards get picked up. And a good example of an area where we have a lot of cooperation is NFPA 55. Which specifically they're working on Chapter 13, which is carbon dioxide systems. That work is ongoing right now. The committee that we have is working to develop proposed changes to that NFPA chapter by January 2024. So that's an example of an active external work effort. Some of the internal publications that we're looking on, actually Josh Pringle has been a major contributor to at least one of them, and probably several, but I know one that's near and dear to his heart is G614, which is a brand new standard for carbon dioxide monitoring in industrial and near consumer applications. So that publication's being drafted to address concerns as code revisions are made to the fire codes, to the National Board Inspection Code and to NFPA, and to make sure that there is better guidance on the hazardous characteristics of CO2 and the strategies for installation of those monitoring systems. We also, I think anybody in the CO2 space is familiar with some of the pressures of the supply chain that have been exacerbated over the last couple of years, especially during COVID. We have a new publication that's in draft development called Carbon Dioxide Supply Chain. It's going to be a higher level educational document about the supply chain. One of the challenges that we found during some of those shortages is that particularly people outside of our industry don't understand the sensitivities of that supply chain fairly well. So it's going to provide a higher level view of what that supply chain looks like, but then also best practices for quality assurance at depots, distributors, and other parts of the supply chain. And publication target for that one is 2024. So that one is very, very much in the active stages of revision at this point. And then the last one that's new, that's under development right now, is the guideline for inspection and use of carbon steel container nozzles in carbon dioxide service. That publication is actually being drafted in response to some incidents that have happened in the industry, primarily on older CO2 tanks. So this will be a guideline to warn of the dangers of using carbon steel nozzles on those older tanks when they're corroding, and provide guidance on inspections and corrective actions on those. So those are examples of some of the publications that we're working on. A newer piece CGA is doing is getting more involved in advocacy when it's related to industry safety and reliability of supply for the industry. And again, we all know that kind of that supply issue with CO2 has been a big question mark the last couple of years. And now we're seeing all these regulatory initiatives get introduced that prioritize the sequestration of CO2 in an effort to achieve green climate initiatives, which is all a good thing. but we feel like it's been done without a clear understanding of the necessity of CO2 to so many applications, for food production and beverage production, for medical help, for water treatment and things like that. And so we are engaged in an initiative right now to develop some educational materials to help the folks on the Hill, to help some of the regulatory authorities better understand the impacts that lack of CO2 available in the supply chain could have on some of those critical areas of the economy.
There's so many different resources that you guys have rolling out. That was great. And especially, next year, there's a lot of resources that not only industry professionals, but end users can gain as well from CGA, which is terrific. But Laura, one more time on piece of advice. So I know we've talked about resource, we've talked about awareness, we've talked about safety. In terms of industry professionals, if you could give one thing, if it's to a member or an end user or supplier, just on CO2 safety in general, to take home and implement, what would that one thing be?
I think that one thing would be to talk to the people in your business that are actually handling CO2 on a day-to-day basis. It is really interesting when we get to go out. A lot of times the senior person at a brewery or one of these other organizations is aware of the CO2 hazards, what kind of safety systems they have in place, and things like that. But because the changeover in staff is so frequent at other parts of the business, a lot of times those people have no idea what the hazards of CO2 are, even just the basics, that it's heavy and it's going to sink to the floor or to any kind of pit area or anything like that. So that would be my ask to anybody in this industry who is dealing specifically with customers and end-use applications, is to just have those conversations when you're on site. You don't have to turn it into a safety lecture or anything like that, but just some really high points on safety and things that they need to be aware of, I think would go a long way in helping people understand and respect the product that they're using and just have the basic knowledge that they need to use it safely.
I think that was perfectly said. I know that's something that we also continue to drive just from a gas detection manufacturing standpoint, is not just to have safety with new members, but also existing, to make sure that you're really practicing what you preach and that everyone is continually up to date when it comes to safety protocol. So I think that was excellently said, Laura. I really appreciate you for just giving us so much insight on this call today, in terms of resources, in terms of safety best practices. But obviously for people that I'm sure will tune into this and want to gain resources right away from CGA with your immense portfolio, where could they gather more information and gain more insight?
Absolutely. So the best place to start is our public website, and that's just at cganet.com. If they want to email cga@cganet.com with any questions, if somebody's looking to join membership, or if they're trying to find the right publication to meet their needs, then our customer service team will be happy to help them explore those options and to figure out what publications are the best fit for them. The safety posters and things like that we mentioned earlier are available for free on that public website. They don't require a login. You don't have to put in your email address or do anything to get to those. So that's the best place to start. And those are under our resources tab on the homepage.
Excellent. Super valuable. Thank you so much. I will be sure to link that here as well for everyone, Laura. But I appreciate your time once more. This was a great month to talk about it. Always talking about safety is critical in our industry, but you provided so much perspective, especially when it comes to a resource perspective as well, on where individuals can go just to gain these readily available resources to really help not only themselves, but their team and their establishment just on promoting safety best practice. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Morgan. It's been such a pleasure to be with you today.
Absolutely. And thank you for being a partner for CO2 Meter. Like I mentioned, you guys have always been such a great partner for us. So I'm sure there'll be more soon.
Yes, we very much enjoy working with Josh and the other CO2 Meter staff who participate on our CGA activities, and look to see you guys even more involved as we move forward here.